funding, quite frankly, from Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. But the headline coming from CBS News this morning is JD Vance says crypto finally has a champion in the White House during a Bitcoin conference speech. And I think that absolutely sums it well, quite frankly, that a lot of the rise of tech is being championed by the Trump administration. So for more on this and kind of the context and is this a good thing, let's go to a favorite friend of the show, Tho Bishop, who is the content director of the Mises Institute. So Tho, what do you make of crypto and Bitcoin having a champion in JD Vance and President Trump in the White House?
Yeah, well, this is a continuation of something that has been building for quite some time. Having the vice president at a Bitcoin event would have been something, I think, unthinkable in those circles, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Obviously, it's high numbers out there in the markets today. Perhaps plays a role in its increased political clout. But it's fascinating from a number of perspectives. One, it seems that every time I'm on your show, we're talking about the national debt, we're talking about things the Fed is doing wrong, and obviously an element of Bitcoin has an appeal as something independent of the dollar and government currencies, and as a response to that. But there's also the broader political dynamic. Not only is Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as a whole kind of seen as a sort of libertarian response to a variety of government programs or problems, but it's also become a very clear, what we might call a special interest group, that Republicans have been able to take the baton and run with, in large part because of the very oppressive policies from the Biden administration that were, hobby horses from Elizabeth Warren in particular. And so it's very interesting that if we think back in the 90s, right, imagine if one political party dominated the money coming out of the internet as it was becoming what the internet is today. From a political point of view, that's kind of what we're seeing from the crypto industry. And so there's two components to this. One is the policy, the practical use cases of this emerging financial technology. The other side is the political dynamic to it and the ability for Republicans to really capture that energy for Trump and other candidates, both last election cycle and going into the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do you think overall it's a good posture for the Trump administration?
I think it is. There are aspects. There's certain stories out there when it comes to Trump's meme coin and certain individual interests, not with the broader Trump family that people can look at and make their own decisions for. I mean, we don't talk about that when you have politicians out there peddling books to large donors and things like that. So I'll let people take that aspect of it and do with it what they will. But I think Bitcoin itself as a project and a constituency is important for a variety of reasons. One is that it has proven to be a fairly helpful, a very successful financial asset that is very easy for normal people to buy, even if they may not always fully understand it. There's definitely that caveat there, which I think helps a lot in terms of particularly younger people being able to generate their wealth. I think that's an important aspect of it from even almost a cultural perspective. But there's an additional component where obviously the banking industry, this is the point that J.D. Vance made at his talk, is that we've seen how crypto can be used as a solution for the debanking issues that have come up in the last several years, and as an alternative to some of the use of Wall Street and financial institutions as an extension of state censorship and the like. And there's also just the larger reality that it is a check. It is in some ways a hedge against inflation, a bet against government manipulation of finance in that extent. And so there is a small government ideological component to it. Now, how that stands in contrast with some of the spending bills coming out of Congress and things like that. I'm not suggesting there's necessarily a neat line of ideological consistency that perhaps comes from some of that sort of stuff. But I think in terms of the broader conservative movement, and particularly the component of sort of political disruption and trying to reset your broader American, governing institutions alike to something that serves Americans more than traditional established special interest groups, I think Bitcoin is very much kind of within that mold there of what we're seeing with the Republican Party as a whole, or at least what it pretends to want to be at election time at times. I think it's definitely what Republican voters kind of tend to want when it comes to challenging politics as usual.
And I'm speaking with Tho Bishop, who is the content director for the Mises Institute, and you can follow him at Tho Bishop on X. And do you think that this message from the Trump administration and J.D. Vance, being the youngest, the millennial, or the first millennial vice president, not necessarily the youngest overall in history, but at least youngest currently for millennials, do you think that this message is resonating with younger and tech savvy voters?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we saw a massive, we've even seen it represented in the administration in a number of ways. And not only, I mean, we can point to Elon Musk and that whole investment that he had with both the campaign and the administration, with him leaving in an official capacity this week. But people like David Sachs, you've had a number of a lot of talent from Silicon Valley that has been willing to either support the Trump administration financially through political contributions, or serve in largely these sort of policy advisory committees and the like. And I think that's a very significant trend relative to what we've seen in the past. And I think it also was demonstrated with the broad 2024 coalition, of not just your 2016, 2020 MAGA base, but an element of the RFK side of things, where you had a lot of sort of libertarian overlap and different sort of Joe Rogan style sort of voters with it. Certain elements of the libertarian movement that were a lot more receptive to Trump this time around than previously. And I think Bitcoin tends to be one of those topics that overlaps a lot of those circles. And so to the extent that, when we think about, what people have a very, very strong opinion of, besides just arguing online about different philosophical viewpoints and the like, they typically care a lot about what they have a financial stake in. And so as we've seen Bitcoin become an increasingly attractive investment, and people seeing number go up when they check their Coinbase account, the extent to which policies can help improve the financial standing of voters is one of the best ways of making sure that you have a continued interest in the political well-being of your coalition. So I think the fact that it gives something, particularly younger people that have been so phased out of home ownership, may not be able to nearly invest in stocks and other assets, being able to have a bit of exposure to Bitcoin and the connection of that to policies that improve the success of that industry as a whole is definitely a very positive thing from a political trajectory, on top of any additional benefits that comes just from the broader project.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the the crypto users have been very concerned about over-regulation and the administrative state and kind of that scheme. And it appears that the Trump administration, especially through J.D. Vance, wants kind of a global competitiveness and wants America in particular to kind of have this edge, not only on crypto but also artificial intelligence, like basically all the tech. And this comes, of course, as the Trump campaign very early on, even before the main stage of the November 2024 election, had the digital Bill of Rights. And, it seems that they're trying purposefully to engage in kind of this tech savvy policy. So do you think that executive action or deregulatory reform will ultimately be the best boost for crypto? And is that kind of a characterization of how Trump is a champion in the White House for crypto?
Well, there's definitely been a lot from the executive branch. And again, for one, it's hard to overstate just how oppressive the Biden regime really was to this industry. I mean, you have people that were telling stories about, again, having your bank account stolen from them because of inventing within that field, right? I mean, it was an extremely oppressive environment. I think Vance's line was how, Democrats wanted to offshore the crypto industry as a whole. And there's a lot of very interesting stories from that. But the other side of it, though, is that along with the executive actions. One of the frustrations I think that you've expressed, that I've expressed, is the lack of legislative follow-through, which some elements of Trump's agenda. And there's actually regulation when it comes to stable coins and some different aspects. Like I don't want to bore your audience with maybe some of the nuances of cryptocurrency there, but this is one of those areas where you are actually seeing things pass the Senate with 60 votes to help change and improve the environment from a legislatively, and not just over reliance upon executive orders. And then part of that is because you have an element of the Democratic Party that recognizes, that are very concerned about being left out and completely boxed out from the support that they've historically have enjoyed from Silicon Valley. And so that's one of the really interesting, I think, aspects of this, is that crypto policy might actually be one of those areas where the direction Trump wants to go from a policy perspective will have unusual allies in the legislative branch, in part because of the own self-interest of Democrats. But that's another kind of interesting aspect of this particular story that is going to be worth monitoring, not only in the short term, but throughout the rest of Trump's presidency.
And as Elon Musk has been kind of taking a step back and saying, that he's going to disengage with Doge and all of this. He's obviously been a big champion for tech innovation and some of these things. Peter Thiel, I'm sure, is still very much engaged in all of this. How will potentially Musk disengaging with politics change if this kind of strategy, if anything?
Well, I think when it comes to kind of Trump's relationship with crypto, it goes deeper than having Musk being a resident of Mar-a-Lago or his involvement with Doge. There's a lot of players within it. I do think it'll be interesting from Musk's perspective going forward, is that I think having his experience in D.C. and having the very common occurrence that one gets in D.C., which is being disillusioned with the broader process and the way that the sausage of particularly spending bills is made in reality there. That's where an area like Bitcoin and like crypto and like one of the best solutions to government bureaucracy that we've seen has been the creative genius of entrepreneurship. And so, even if, and again, the spending aspect of it is absolutely horrible, right? This runaway thing. I mean, all of Elon's concerns about spending are absolutely correct, and Congress is completely, hurting, not just current Americans but future generations with their problems there. But crypto is one of those areas where I wouldn't be surprised to see even more energy from someone like Elon, who becomes more disillusioned with maybe traditional politics, but views entrepreneurship and innovation as a way of breaking through the regulatory leviathan in order to create real changes that can not only help the future economy of America per se, but has a lot of advantages to personal liberties and a variety of these other sort of deeper principles that Elon, particularly in the last several years, has been willing to talk about and very much vocalize using X and his other platforms. Yeah,
and this kind of entrepreneurship, I think, is at the heart of Trump's love of self-government and liberty, and why he became a Republican to begin with. And so, as we're looking at some of this this kind of strategy on crypto, do you think Trump would replace the current SEC and CFTC leadership with more pro-innovation figures or restructure agencies that have stood in the way of kind of this leviathan of blockchain progress?
I think that's definitely the hope, and again, I think there's enough incentive there to see follow through. And so again, I think that's going to end up being one of the major measures here. Is this alignment between political self-interest, maybe some personal self-interest, and this broader ideological wave and the greater appeal to Republican politics from kind of these Silicon Valley folks? Is that very unique alignment that we've had over the last year and a half? To what extent can it actually shape policy going forward in the future? And I think that you've seen, whether it's from Bessent, whether it's from Musk, whether it's from Trump, whether it's from a number of allies, if there's concerns about the ability and the political will to address spending, regulatory reform slashing that state, trying to outgrow some of the burdens that come with government spending, right? I mean, there's a lot of eggs kind of in that basket that's kind of baked into some of the projections and what they've been used to sell the big, beautiful bill, right? So if one is truly pursuing a growth-focused approach to policy, then deregulation and very severe deregulation has to be part of that equation. And obviously that includes not only energy and gas and all sort of aspects of it, but also technological innovation and being able to keep a cutting-edge approach to those elements.
Yeah, well, all of this is so fascinating, Tho Bishop, and I appreciate you staying on a little longer because I had so many questions for you in this segment, but we'll have to break here. So follow Tho Bishop and the Mises Institute on X at Tho Bishop, and of course, the Mises Institute. And we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
You could be a part of our first ever Weekend with AFA, Thursday, October 2nd through Saturday, October 4th in Tupelo, Mississippi.
Our Weekend with AFA event in October is going to be a chance to meet AFA supporters in person.
We'll have tours, fellowship, special speakers, and more.
I'll do some stand-up comedy, Abe will do some preaching, and I'm really excited about it.
It's a Weekend with AFA, Thursday, October 2nd through Saturday, October 4th in Tupelo, Mississippi. Speakers will include Abraham Hamilton III, Jenna Ellis, Tim Barton, Tim Wildman, and more.
I am thoroughly looking forward to our Weekend with AFA coming up in October, where we're going to be able to meet our supporters like yourself, the fellowship, to visit our facilities here in Tupelo, and to have everyone come together for a wonderful weekend.
That's October 2nd through 4th. It's a Weekend with AFA, and we hope you can join us. Register at afa.net/weekend. That's afa.net/weekend.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Abraham, in the tiny, impoverished country of Burundi, Africa, the Hutu and Tutsi tribes have historically fought endlessly against each other, and 7-year-old Bosco would find that his mother and father were both murdered at the hands of radicals, and that left him in a fit of rage.
I grew up with hatred, revenge. We get to hear people talking that so-and-so killed your mom, so-and-so killed your father.
In his late teens, Bosco heard the gospel preached for the first time, and God brought peace to his heart and turned him into a disciple maker.
God wanting me to start gathering vulnerable people and help them become disciples.
God made something beautiful of Bosco's tragedy, and thousands need Bibles in Burundi and all over the continent of Africa. At $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20. Will you call 800-YES-WORD? 800-YES-WORD. That's 800-YES-WORD, or give it sendbiblesnow.org. Sendbiblesnow.org.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Stearns. Stand by for news and commentary next. Several weeks ago, former FBI Director James Comey alleged he and his wife were just walking along a beach and suddenly came upon shells that had been arranged to form the numbers 8647. The nation's former top lawman then pleaded ignorance, says he had no idea that meant assassinating President Trump. Well, even Deputy Barney Fife knew the numbers 86 were code for killing somebody. To date, Comey has not been charged with a crime, and I warned you at the time that would lead to bigger problems. Sure enough, Never-Trumpers now feel emboldened. In the aftermath over the weekend, dozens of protesters in Wichita, Kansas, clogged downtown sidewalks chanting Comey's slogan, 8647. And no surprise, but not a single person was arrested. It's time for leaders of the anti-Trump resistance to order their minions to stand down. There is no place for such violent rhetoric in American politics. I'm Todd Stearns.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. So probably a lot of you have heard, at least just on a surface level, about the group of 59 South African Afrikaners that arrived in the United States this month after being granted refugee status by the Trump administration. And this group, according to some reports was prioritized under an executive order which expedited the refugee application process for Afrikaners who the administration claimed were fleeing racial discrimination and land appropriation. The decision was highly controversial, and there's been a lot of criticism and also support for the Trump administration's actions. And meanwhile, the South African president met with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, and it's been very interesting to see how American coverage of this Oval Office meeting, the tenor of it. So, for example, Bloomberg and the Straits Times, Politico, they all talk about how the South African president, quote, recalls his bemusement at the Trump Oval Office encounter, while others like CNN are characterizing this as an ambush of the president when they were talking about some genocide, and the South African president said, no, that doesn't happen. And then there was actual footage that Trump said, well, look at these pictures, and actually showed him on a television. So what is the context of this? How should we look at what is going on rather than just reading kind of some of these very pointed and frankly biased headlines? Well, for more on this discussion, let's turn to Gavin McClellan, who is a former Rhodesian War veteran and South African diplomat. So, Gavin, I think there's a lot of context here that some of the just kind of top-level headline readers, like me, frankly, and probably most of our audience, don't really understand the history here. So, kind of walk us through what's going on in the state of South Africa today.
Greetings. Well, first of all, what we have to look at is the date of 1652, when the Dutch arrived at the Cape of Good Hope. And during that time frame, there were no Bantu, that is, black migrating tribes, had not migrated down to the Cape as yet. And in fact, for the first 120 years, there was no meetup between the Dutch, who are now the Boer, the Afrikaner, the farmer, and the Bantu, which we have Julius Malema as the African National Youth League, the African National Congress Youth League, forming something called the Economic Freedom Fighters, and saying that all the land is theirs and kill the Boer. Now, it has been caught on video that the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is actually welcoming, at any time, Cyril Ramaphosa is welcoming Julius Malema back into the ANC if he wishes to go back into that particular governing party. That governing party has not done much in the way of servicing for its own black population, although it sprouts forth a white A night, get out, and the land is ours. So there's a lot of corruption in the African National Congress, and this is something that has to be tackled, bearing in mind that the Cape Province, where South Africa has its Houses of Parliament for half the year and Pretoria the other half of the year, are split between the north and the south of the country. So the government controls the north and the south, but the south has always been indigenously the Khoisan, and the Afrikaner, the Boer, the Khoisan, they actually get on well with each other. They are the indigenous, and the Dutch getting on well with each other. And in comes this firepower of Julius Malema with basically very communist rhetoric. And for that, we have to look at the communist roots of the African National Congress. And I'll just stop there for a moment and see if you have anything further to say.
Yeah, well, this is really fascinating to listen to this. And I know that there's been a lot of social media commentary and argumentation, of course, about what indigenous actually means in the context, I think, of any nation, but specifically to South Africa. And does this actually matter? Who is indigenous, or the fact that, others have, like the Dutch have, been there for over 400 years. And it's like, well, okay, one generation, if you are a born citizen of a country, doesn't that make you indigenous?
Then we have to look at who really stirred up really instigated a lot of the Soweto riots. And we have to look at a fellow by the name of Joe Slovo. In fact, we really have to look, if we just go back to the initial Nelson Mandela being a revolutionary, there was a fellow who, by the name of Richard Kreitner, and he worked for the New York Times, and he wrote up something in 2013, November 25th, 2013, and his title was Nelson Mandela was a revolutionary, and these Jews made common cause with him. So this is a Jew writing about communist Jews making cause for the black cause, but not for the white. They seem to be rather anti-white and pro-black. And I think that this communist rhetoric needs to be delved into. They need to sort it out and say enough of that. The people that were, in 1963, it was basically 6 Jews and 7 blacks in a raid on the African National Congress hideout in the Johannesburg suburb of Rivonia. In fact, in 1981, I lived in that same suburb, so I found it quite interesting just going and having a look at the area. But from that time onwards, we've got to look at Nelson Mandela and his way forward. Who facilitated that? There is a lot of Jewish influence there. Lazar Sadelsky, the South African-born son of refugees from Lithuania, he was just one of them. I could name them, but ultimately, like Nat Bregman, a cousin of Lazar Sadelsky. Then we go on to the next one. Arthur Goldreich was born in 1929 to a family proud to belong to the Anglo-Jewish state, the Anglo-Jewish elite. It just carries on. It's just it's quite astounding actually when one looks at all of that. There was another Harold Wolpe. He became politicized after participating in a socialist Zionist youth project at teaching at a local nightclub for blacks, where he witnessed firsthand the dehumanizing effects of a racist society. So all of this sort of thing is a massive buildup that we have to get away from.
And do you think that the current government's approach to all of these, race relations and affirmative action and what's going on is actually helping or harming national unity?
Okay, it is putting all national unity into the unity of the African National Congress and all other, there are 11 official languages over there. So you think of the 11 official languages, which one is getting a voice? All the other tribes are being diminished in their representation, and the African National Congress is just becoming a political communist party that's taking over the country. That Nelson Mandela was aiming against. I remember when I was at the South African Embassy, and this goes back to 1994 when Nelson Mandela became president. I was protocol officer there. And one of the things he said to us, in fact, it was the very first meeting he had when he came over, and we were at the ambassador's house one evening, and he said, look, the answer was actually to the question, is there going to be a problem for the farmers? And he said, look, there's not going to be any retribution. And in fact, if those farmers, Afrikaners, anyone in the land, the white British, those people are oppressed, then we have to look at who is oppressing them. We have to rise above it. So Nelson Mandela, over time, had gone from this radical communist outlook into becoming a proper statesman. Someone has to step up to that lead again.
And, Mandela really is all that the average American knows. My producer was talking in my ear as we're having this conversation, and I think Adam is right that the media is trying to make Trump look stupid, and yet the truth is coming out. But Americans are so clueless about the rest of the world, unless the media specifically wants us to know, but wants us to know in a biased fashion. And so nobody's been talking about all of this and the history in South Africa until now, when it becomes kind of a political tool for the American media to use to try to slam Trump. And I think this explains why the headlines are so biased and trying to say, that the South African president was bemused by Trump and this was an ambush and all of those characterizations. But for the average American who hasn't been paying attention, frankly, to what's been going on in South Africa, what is the takeaway point that we need to have to understand what's actually going on with Trump's relationship with South Africa right now?
I've looked at quite a few of the responses to President Trump, and even from some South African points of view. My perspective is that President Trump has to expose what is going on, and one realizes now that there is very much a left-wing and a right-wing argument that gets spun. But behind all of that argument, there is still a global outreach for global domination. And when I say that, a lot of the South African folks who are in the economic circles are saying, oh, well, Trump is just doing this because he wants all our minerals and wealth and etc. So in it is something for America's pocket. But then other folks are saying there is no genocide. And then when you really listen to the farmers on the land and you really look at what's going on over time, there is a definite genocide program being developed against the farmers. How to sort that out? You're going to have black and white come together, and I would say out of the black, the Zulus would be the strongest voice, the ones with the most respect, because they've fought the loudest and the hardest in time and stood up actually to the Brits in the Boer War, and then the Boers respect that, and in a way the Zulus respect the Boer, the Afrikaner. So if you have some strong voices come out of that, then you will have this racism that is being stoked by the African National Congress being squashed. There is not that much racism in South Africa on your ordinary land per se. I'm talking about your suburbs, your towns, the biggest cities. There is a lot of crime, but that's just because of the economic disaster fomented by the actions of the African National Congress. The Cape is really governed by another Democratic Party, which is doing very well. The roads are better, everything is better. So we're actually having two sorts of governments showing up, the good and the bad of the way they are moving. When there is enough of the bad of the African National Congress, then you will see the other side say, well, hold on, we really need to keep our country together. And that will be a democratic movement that is against the African National Congress. And somewhere in the African National Congress, you have to have someone within their midst have the strength to stand up against someone who can put 100,000 militaristic youth into a stadium and get them all chanting to go and kill the white.
Wow, this is such a complex topic, and I'm really grateful, Gavin McClement, that you are shedding light on some of this. We'll have to have you back again when we have a little more time to go even further into this complexity. But again, really appreciate your commentary here, and listeners can find Gavin McClement on Facebook, facebook.com/Gavin McClement. The last name is McLeman, and we will be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Life can be hard, but we have to keep our eyes focused on Jesus. I'm Christy Graham, host of On the Ground with Samaritan's Purse, and I want to encourage you in your walk with God. Listen each week as we go behind the scenes of our work around the world. You'll be challenged and encouraged in your own faith as you hear how God is actively changing lives. Join us for On the Ground with Samaritan's Purse, Sundays at 8:30 a.m. Central, right here on American Family Radio.
Fostering and adoption is not a Band-Aid for infertility. It is a calling, and God can change the desire of your heart and make that so rewarding. It's the most beautiful, selfless thing. It's pure religion, but it's not a fix to I desire biological child. God has to deal with that in your heart separately.
Hannah's Heart, encouraging couples through infertility and miscarriage. Saturdays, 4 a.m. Central on AFR or on the AFR app.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Hey, I wanted to make you aware of our trips to Israel and Greece in 2026. We're going in March. It's usually a beautiful time of the year to go in terms of the weather, and we're excited to go back to Israel for like our 27th or 28th time and take a group of folks who want to see the land where Jesus walked. That's in March. Also in March, my sons Wesley and Walker are leading a tour to Greece and to what we call the Footsteps of Paul tour. Those are going to be back to back. So if you want to do both, you're welcome to do both. Again, Israel and Greece, 2 separate trips in March of 2026. For all the information, go to wildmangroup.com, WILDMON group.com.
Proverbs 13:22 tells us it's good to have something to pass down to your grandchildren. That legacy could be in the form of highlighting in your Bible, or it could be in your record of charitable giving. One way to support your family in the years ahead is through the AFA Foundation. By supporting the ministry of the American Family Association, you can support your own family as well as countless others around the world. The AFA Foundation can help you with responsible asset management, which can promote your faith and values. If you're looking for a way to do the most for others, a representative at the AFA Foundation can assist you with estate planning, beneficiary designations, charitable gift annuities, and much more. Why not set something in motion that will affect others for generations to come? Contact the AFA Foundation at 800-326-4543, extension 345. Find us on Facebook or email foundation@afa.net. As God has blessed you, you can bless others through the AFA Foundation.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And finally, on this Friday, the Democrats are dropping a $20 million plan on bizarre American men strategy study in an effort to dig out of 2024 political hole. This coming from Fox News. President Donald Trump gained significant support among young men across radical racial demographics in 2024. So the Democrats are spending this $20 million on a study examining how to speak to American men after losing ground with the 2024 election cycle, the New York Times apparently revealed. So they reported on Sunday, quote, "Speaking with American Men, a strategic plan is a project crafted by Democrats to study the syntax, language, and content that gains attention and virality in these spaces." I'm guessing this is not Kamala Harris that is winning over men in any of her syntax, language, and content, but, you know, who knows? So my next guest, who is Ray Alexander, a retired U.S. Naval commander, has a different theory on what should appeal to young men and how it's so important for men of not only his generation but also younger to hear about how to become men and how to have principle and perhaps even vote their values. So, Ray, good morning. And this conversation had kind of come about regardless of this headline, which I think is an interesting tie-in from a social media post you had about working some land, and so tell us kind of this story and why this particular issue I think is really timely.
Yeah. So awesome to speak with you again, Jenna, and this is a great topic, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. So many years ago, I guess a little background on me, I was a junior enlisted. I enlisted in 1999 as a sonar technician on submarines, then went to officer candidate school, became a logistics officer, went to deployed a few times on submarines, went to Afghanistan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and ended up retiring a couple of years ago out of the reserves. And throughout that time, my family saw an opportunity to buy a small distressed property in central Indiana. It's about 3 acres, and it's got an old farmhouse, late 1800s, early 1900s farmhouse that's dilapidated, kind of fell out of use, and is now no longer no longer recoverable. And based on all the advice I've been given, folks have told me to flip it or to turn it into a cash generating property as soon as possible. And everything I watched on HGTV and everything I read about investing for dummies and everything told me that that's what I should do with it. But I had a different vision for it. I was kind of called to invest energy and effort into the property to try to turn it into something myself. I had never worked land. I was raised in the inner city of Rochester, New York by a single mom, and didn't really have much guidance on how to use my hands or drive equipment. But by this time, my boys were probably 8 and 10 years old, just a few years ago. And, I had this vision to bring them up to Indiana and help work the land with me. We rented a mini excavator and started pulling out, started working on the land, started grading it out, taking care of it, building burn piles and burn pits. And I'm a novice, so I'm learning it as I go in front of my sons, which I don't mind. I'm not ashamed to try to figure things out in front of them. In fact, I think that's kind of, useful for them to try to witness somebody figuring a problem out. And it just ended up being a wonderful experience. Even just the drive up with my boys was a great time where we could talk about things that we don't often get the time to talk about, let the conversation develop, talk about God, and bring us all three closer to God with each other as father and sons. And I think this is kind of, I don't really have a very mature, ready to articulate position or philosophy on this, but I'm walking you through the kind of developing theory on this, how to develop young men in America. Mm-hmm. And sort of over the years, this has become a once a year or twice a year trip for us. We come up. We manage the land and try to improve the property. And over years, it's become quite a nice little piece of property. It still has a lot of work to do on it. We still got to take the house down, which I plan to do by hand, to show my boys, the value of hard work and show them how a structure is put together. This house is old enough where it was originally a three-room house with a central fireplace. They said, "Dad, where's the plumbing?" I said, "Well, that used to be outside. They used to pump the water and bring it in." Where's the toilet? Well, that we used to be outside too. Just these small lessons and showing my kids how folks used to live, and showing them that it can be done. While we're here, we camp out on the property and handle things, like a weeks long camping trip with some work involved.
And it's such a wholesome story. I think to talk about. Just getting back to the land, having time with your sons, and choosing to, raise them in the fear and admonition of the Lord, even in spite of, what your experience was in being raised by a single mother. And I think that that's so encouraging to so many who have come from not ideal circumstances, whether that's a fatherless home, it's just a whole variety of circumstances that you can choose to have your family different. That was the same with my parents. Both of their sets of parents had divorced, and that was kind of we weren't in the same situation as we are in kind of the no-fault divorce that, over 50% end in divorce of marriages and all of that we're just very commonly used to. Back in their day, it was a fairly uncommon experience. And so when they got married very young, they purposed to do things differently and have stayed together since being married at the age of 18, and they raised me and my brothers in a very different context than how they were raised in, and built a legacy on the foundation of Christ instead of just on their own experience. And so I think what you're talking about, Ray, is so important and genuinely encouraging for people to hear, because we can choose to follow the Lord regardless of circumstances that life brings. And so when we're talking about the next generation of men, and kind of tying this back into the Democrats wanting to, spend $20 million on a study examining how to speak to American men. It's like, that to me is so ridiculous in the sense of we need a $20 million study. Like, we just need fathers. We just need the church. We just need to engage in Scripture, right?
Yes, the plan has already been laid out for us, and we just need to respect the 6,000-year-old tradition of the Judeo-Christian church and biblical teachings, and of the church and Judeo-Christian values. And I'm relatively new. I was baptized and saved in 2022, so I was raised in a sort of typical secular humanist, atheistic household, where my mother kind of claims spirituality in the kind of common way that you hear a lot of leftists talking about spirituality. But looking back, I know Christ has always been with me, walking beside me, and guiding me through my life. And for that, I'm so grateful and thankful. Because at a very young age, I knew that I would have a family, and I knew that I would learn the lessons of my childhood and apply them to raising my children in a different way, that I knew I would be available to them and committed to raising them in as safe and stable an environment as possible. And then thankfully was saved, just 3 or 4 years ago. And now by His grace, I have had this thousands of years of human tradition now opened up as reference and as a guide to help me shepherd my family through, tribulations and the normal challenges of a daily life with 3 teenagers, or now almost 3 teenagers. There is this thousands of year old tradition that can help me guide my children through that, despite not having guidance myself. To getting to the Democratic study, it is it's beyond farce. It's beyond parody. The Babylon Bee couldn't write a better headline. It's so stunning year after year how deeply the left digs itself into, or how far away they demonstrate themselves to be from the spirit of the nation and from the kind of true American spirit. It's comical. It's so funny that it's almost sad. However, Jenna, the one thing that I do want to make sure that I focus on is, one of my concerns is that at some point the left is going to have to realize that they are so disconnected that they need to reset their worldview, at which point I become concerned that we've lost our opportunity on the right. We need to be aggressive and forthright in reaching out to the youth with conservative values. I have just become involved in the Republican Party machine. Being in the military for about 20 years, I'm apolitical, and I never achieved. I was 05, so I never achieved the sufficient rank to start to become political. Thank God. So just becoming familiar with the way that the party operates, and we have, even in my small community, have sort of a split vision on how to approach the youth. The older, sort of more, the older folks, the folks with a kind of older perspective, sort of an older Republican Guard vision, are almost seem embarrassed by Trump, or almost seem embarrassed by sort of the new aggressive approach. Whereas the younger folks, there's a Marine female who's putting together a run in our area in an attempt to gather interest and support and engagement for the Republican Party. And she wanted it to have sort of a more aggressive advertising campaign, but was being persuaded against that by folks who were afraid that people were going to be turned off by the message. And I have aggressively argued for the latter, or for the former, where we need to be aggressive, that the youth are savvy enough and are exposed enough to misinformation. I'll call it misinformation. It's a loaded term, but to misinformation online, that the youth can see through almost all mismessaging and will be turned off immediately if they sense any degree of dishonesty or of manipulation. What appeals to the youth nowadays is blunt and brutal honesty. And so we need to be honest with our conservative values, with the religious basis of our values, and just be forthright and honest. That will turn more people onto our message than will turn them off. Even on the left, people are so exhausted by being misled that honesty and truth will carry the day. And what a wonderful time to be alive, to be honest with you, when you don't have to confuse your message with a bunch of machinations or nuance. You just say the truth, and that will attract people to your message.
Yeah, so well said. I was speaking to Ray Alexander, and you can follow him on X at RMA1776. On X, RMA1776. I'd encourage you to do that. And really, I think every generation, especially when they're younger, are looking for authenticity, whether that is in a religious context, understanding who is the true God. You're looking for truth, whether that's in politics and politicians, whether that's in, any aspect of your life, relationships, you're looking for truth. And for the Democrats to be saying, we need a $20 million study as if, the American male is some kind of foreign species that we have to study under a microscope. To me, it's missing the entire point of authenticity. This isn't just about manipulation or what plays well in the media or what goes viral and how to, get their attention so that we can manipulate them into voting. But that's basically what they are openly saying they're attempting to do, instead of just saying, well, what works? What types of policies work for American men, and especially men who have been sidelined, who have been the typical white American male is probably the most hostile figure for the left in terms of how they treat men in this country. And yet the Democrats then wonder why their message isn't resonating. It's so ridiculous that it would be laughable if it weren't just absolutely tragic. And yet you see how so many young men are actually taken captive by that message. They call themselves feminists. They call them, all this stuff to identify appropriately and all of this, instead of just returning back to truth. So last 30 seconds here before we have to end the show. I'll turn over to you, Ray, for final comments.
Yeah, and this is unfortunately being expressed in the military as well, the military culture, where I was the company commander for a cargo terminal company, and senior leadership was telling me not to drive them so hard, but it was driving them hard and facing challenges that gelled us into a cohesive unit, and that is what we need.
So well said. Well, I appreciate you bringing this topic. It's so important, Ray Alexander. And for everyone listening, you can also catch my episode of On Demand dropping today at afr.net. Conversation with my good friend Dinesh D'Souza about Elon Musk and politics. You're not going to want to miss it. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family
Radio.
Family,
freedom. American Family Radio.
Sometimes being an insider means you understand the joke that only certain ones really know. Other times, it gets you into exclusive places. As an AFA insider, you'll get information about issues and policies that can dramatically impact our families and our Christian rights, and you won't have to travel to D.C. or even dress up to get it. Find out more and sign up at afa.net/activism.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News on the Hour. I'm Chad Groening. The State Department is discussing Russia's intentions regarding a ceasefire in Ukraine, with the Kremlin's escalating attacks. Fox's Kristen Goodwin has more.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce detailing Secretary of State Marco Rubio's call with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
The Secretary reiterated President Trump's calls for constructive good faith dialogue with Ukraine as the only path forward, ending the war.
Echoing what she called President Trump's extreme frustration over Russia's killing of civilians while ceasefire talks are going on.
We've said multiple times that we're going to judge Russia based not on what they say, but on what they do. And right now what's happening